Welcome to True Crime Wine Wednesday. I am Sherilyn Dale, and I am so glad you found me. I'm rocking some pre-surgery hair. A little fun fact, as you are watching this, I will be 1 week into recovery, the surgery that I'm having. So being a mom of 3 C-section babies, 2 surgeries already, having like the hair just as the last thing to worry about is, I think, my biggest win of like accomplishing like a solid strategy for recovery. I don't want to worry about my hair. So that's what we're doing today. So anyways, exciting things as you're watching this. I'll be get into recovery and hopefully just laying there responding to you, enjoying my relaxation recovery time. Anyways, today we are talking about one of those cases that blindsides you at every single corner. It's really one of the most bizarre true crime stories I've encountered in a really long time, if not ever. Like, I don't really think of one that I've heard of that's very comparable. And it all started with the disappearance of a 19-year-old guy named Zeb Quinn. His disappearance went unsolved for 15 years until a Food Network contestant and her filmmaking husband suddenly also went missing, and then the gruesome truth about what happened to them came to light and ultimately tied to Zeb's case as well. Before we get started, if you can make sure that you are subscribed and notified to the channel, it means so much to me. I have a video for you every single Wednesday and sometimes even on a Friday. All right, get settled. While you do that, here's a riddle for you. What is the difference between a jeweler and a jailer? Let's start with the disappearance of Zeb Quinn. Zeb was born on May 12, 1981 in Asheville, North Carolina, to his mom, Denise, and his father, Jerry. His parents divorced when he was 2, and his sister and him went to go and live with his mother. And Zeb is described as a very shy kid. He struggled quite a bit at school with his concentration. I'm no professional, but just the way that it was being described in one of the books that I read about this case, it kind of sounds like it was, you know, like there's some ADHD aspect there, but not really knowing what that diagnosis was at the time. So it kind of made him retreat a little bit and not be as out there because it was something he was quite insecure about. And he worked really, really hard to make it through school and worked hard to graduate, and he did. I just really like to acknowledge those milestones and those accomplishments for people who have any form of learning disability, anything that hinders them, because I know how hard it is for some people. There's people in school who just are able to skate by without studying, without showing up to class, and then there's others who so desperately want to succeed, but there is something prohibiting that and they have to work extra hard. So it sounds like that's exactly what Zeb struggled with, but he was able to persevere and graduated. In high school, he also became active in an ROTC. So if you are not from the United States and you don't know what that is, it is the Reserve Officers Training Corps, which is a college program offered at more than 1,700 colleges and universities across the United States that prepares young adults to become officers in the U.S. military. On top of that, he also had a job at Walmart, which he really loved. He would even stop at Walmart on his way to school to bring breakfast for some of his coworkers that were there. He just sounded like a really genuine young guy. His closest friends were his coworkers because he spent so much of his free time at work. He picked up as many shifts as he could. So if anybody was trying to give a shift away or they called in sick, Zeb was like the first person everybody thought of because he would always take the shift. And in 2 years, he never missed a shift and never called in sick. The other people that were in his life that he was particularly close with was his mom and sister. Now, at the time of his disappearance, even though his sister had moved out and got married and was living with her husband, Zeb would still call her a couple times a week just to check in, see how things were going, have a chit chat. So the 2 ladies in his life, they really meant a lot to him. After graduating, he had enrolled in a technical college and he was working really hard, like I said, just picking up as many shifts as he could at Walmart to pay for that himself. And he was making so much money and decent money by also taking everybody else's shifts that he had a little bit of extra to play around with. And he decided that he wanted to trade in the vehicle that he had. He owned a Mazda Protege, but he wanted to upgrade it to a Mitsubishi Eclipse. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll understand that whenever I think of like an eclipse, I just go to the Fast and the Furious because it's all big guy watches all the time, every day, all day. So that's what I think of when it. And so Zeb wanted one of those bad boys. So he reached out to an acquaintance of his named Robert Owens, who went by his middle name Jason. He worked at Volvo Construction Equipment, so kind of had an idea of the car industry. And he said to Zeb that he knew of a dealership that actually had one listed and that he would help him go out and take a look at it. They met at Zeb's work in the parking lot on January 2nd, 2000 at around 9 p.m. and Zeb followed Jason in his car. This was the last time that Zeb's co-workers saw him. About 15 minutes later, Zeb and Jason were picked up at a convenience store on the surveillance system, just grabbing some, I'm going to say soda for all of my American viewers, since you are the majority. We call it pop. But they were grabbing some sodas, and that footage at the convenience store was the last time that Zeb was seen. Before Zeb's mom had gone to bed, she sent a page to Zeb because he hadn't checked in and said that he wasn't coming straight home after work. And this was not like him to just not show up. Like I said, he was incredibly close with his mom. She was kind of just working through scenarios in her head of maybe what happened. Maybe he went out to go and party with some co-workers after work. Maybe he stayed later to do some inventory and just forgot to tell her. She was able to convince herself to just be at ease and say that there was just going to be an innocent explanation for it in the morning, and she went to sleep. In the morning, though, when she wakes up, she's a little bit panicked because Zeb is not home. And then pretty much right as she's waking up, she gets a phone call from Zeb's manager at the Walmart and says that Zeb never showed up for work, which is unheard of. He shows up for other people's shifts at work, not just his own. She goes into panic mode. She tries calling everybody that she can think of to see if they've heard from Zeb. Nobody has. But she's also struggling with the fact that Zeb is an adult and she's not wanting to step on his toes and just assume that something is wrong and maybe he's just out there doing his own thing. She gives it one more day, and then it's just like that gut screaming at her. He didn't show up. She hadn't heard from him. And so she goes to the police station to file a missing persons report. And when she gets there, she's like, I have given this enough time. We don't need to wait anymore. This is so unlike my son. I should have been here like 2 days ago. So they agreed to open up an investigation. And then not long after, their curveball is thrown because his boss gets a call at Walmart saying, hey, it's me, Zeb. I'm not going to be in today or for my next couple shifts. Instantly, the manager knew that whoever was on the other line was not Zeb. She had spent enough time with him to know that it was not him over the past 2 years. In fact, he was like her openly favorite employee, obviously, because he's the one that everybody can rely on. And she's like, okay. But she kind of went along with it to see if she could get any information. She asked what was wrong, and Zeb just said he was sick and just wanted to take off the next couple of days to start feeling better. So she was just like, okay, feel better, see you later, click. But this is like, this is in 2000, and I don't know if you remember this. Maybe I'm probably dating myself, aging myself, whatever the term is. She hangs up and dials *69. You remember *69? You dial it and then you can see who called if you didn't have caller ID. Dials *69, gets a number, calls the number back, and a woman answers, and it's like a receptionist. And she works at Volvo Construction Equipment. But she's like, it wasn't me who called. There's lots of employees here. So she calls the investigators, and they quickly find out that the last person that Zeb was seen with, Jason Owens, works at this establishment. Jason agrees to talk to investigators. He says, yeah, he met up with Zeb at the Walmart parking lot, and that Zeb was following him to go and check out this Mitsubishi that he knew of. He said Zeb followed him. They stopped at a convenience store, got back on the road, and it was dark out. So a couple minutes after they had started driving again, Zeb starts flashing his high beams. Jason pulls over, Zeb pulls over, and he says that he's just looking really panicked and saying that he got a page that he needed to respond to right away. So they went back to the convenience store. Jason said that Zeb used the payphone, and when he hung up, he was in like a frenzy. He was kind of scatterbrained, and all he said to him was, "Sorry, I gotta go right now." Jason said that he was actually so frantic that as he was leaving, Zeb accidentally rear-ended Jason and then just kept going, but he was like, "I'll talk to him about that later." The detectives were like, "Oh, okay, cool. So then why did a call come from your work calling Zeb's work, claiming to be Zeb, saying that he's not going to come in for a couple days?" And he said right before Zeb left, he asked him to call in for him and say that he would be in touch in a couple days. And he just figured like the easiest way to avoid questions was to say that he was Zeb. It didn't sound right to the investigators, but they didn't really have any evidence or reason not to believe him. So they took his statement and carried on looking more into Zeb's life and his last steps and some of the people that were in his life. Like I said, there really weren't too many outside of family and co-workers. But a few weeks before he had disappeared, he had finally started talking about a gal that he was showing interest in. She was 19, like Zeb, and her name was Misty Taylor. This pairing wasn't really one that was particularly encouraged from Zeb's family. Zeb's mother and her fiance actually knew Misty because her mom worked for Zeb's mom's fiance's restaurant as a waitress. I'll just give that a moment to settle. So Zeb and Misty met while they were just hanging out at the restaurant. Could be a very cute situation, except for the fact that Misty was in a relationship and having a child with a fella named Wesley Smith. Zeb's family were very clear with him that they did not think that this was really a good idea for him to get caught up in. But he was really smitten, it seemed, and Missy wasn't really rejecting that. She spent a lot of time with Zeb on the phone. They would even meet up for lunch at the mall most days. But Wesley had kind of caught on when one day Zeb had called the house and Wesley answered instead of Misty when Wesley wasn't supposed to be there. He was like, "Don't call here again, don't talk to her again." But Misty was able to get in contact with Zeb and just be like, "I don't want to not talk to you. So maybe when you call, dial *67. Again, another blast of the past, from the past. Gosh, Sherilyn. It sounds like Misty was wanting to hold on to Zeb because there are allegations that Wesley was not very kind, that she was in a abusive relationship. And so I think she found comfort in whatever relationship she saw with Zeb, whether that was just purely friendship or she was interested in something more. And I think that's also part of why he wanted to keep in touch with her as well, because he was aware of what was going on in the relationship, and I think felt like he could protect her and maybe get her out. So when Misty and Wesley are interviewed by detectives, they say that the night that Zeb disappeared, the two of them were together and they were at Misty's parents' house having dinner, which her parents did confirm. But this is where things get a little bit confusing because someone else was also at dinner at Misty's parents' house while she and Wesley were there, and this was a woman named Ina. And so when investigators finally got Zeb's pager records back, they see that he did get a page around the time that Jason said he did at like 9:40, and the number that page belonged to was Ina. Who's Ina? Well, after my voice is done cracking, I'll tell you. She had quite the close connection, not to Misty and her family, but Zeb. She was Zeb's aunt from his father's side, his father's sister. But what was puzzling about this is even though she was Zeb's aunt, it wasn't really like that relationship where they were uber close. It didn't sound like anything bad had gone on or that like there wasn't any falling out or anything. It just they weren't in that type of like aunt nephew relationship where they would just page each other and catch up on the week. But she was close to Misty's mother, hence why she was there for dinner. And where things get confusing is when she's asked about the page, she tells investigators she never paged Zeb and she stayed at Misty's parents' house throughout that whole evening. She even made mention that when she did arrive back at her apartment later on that night, she had to deal with the fact that it had been burglarized while she was out. So there was no time for her to go and meet up with Zeb. They keep moving on in the investigation, and they find out that on January 3rd, so this would be the morning after Zeb was last seen, Jason went to the hospital to be treated for injuries that he said that he received from a car accident. When the detectives contact him about this and be like, why didn't you mention a car accident? You just said that you got rear-ended, nothing major. He says he didn't think to mention it because it was actually a different car accident that happened after he had parted ways with Zeb, and it wasn't anything serious. He was just really vague about it and said that he didn't want to file any reports. The first, I guess, clue came 2 weeks after Zeb was last seen when his car was found on January 16th. It was actually his mom's coworker who had seen it in a parking lot of kind of one of those little, there's a specific word I'm looking for and I can't think of it. Those little convenience store hubs. What is it? A little supermarket, not a supermarket. The word's going to come to me after when I'm rewatching it. If you know it right now, put it in the comments. So Zeb's mom's coworker saw what she believed was Zeb's car in the parking lot. She goes to work. She tells Zeb's mom, Denise, and she obviously immediately goes to the parking lot. It's actually not far away from where she works and confirms that, yes, this is Zeb's car. She calls the police and things get even more confusing at this point. As they're walking up to the car, they see a lipstick drawing of lips on the back of his car with 2 exclamation points marks. That's what happens when you try to say Oh my God. Why am I like this? 2 exclamation points. They're on the back window. And then as they're coming around the car, the back 2 side windows are cracked a little bit. And that's because they look inside and they see this little Labrador puppy in the back seat alive, but did not belong to Zeb. There was also what looked like a room key for a hotel on one of the seats, but it didn't have any indication of what the room number was or what hotel it belonged to. And there was a jacket in the car too that also did not belong to Zeb, and it looked like it belonged to a female. Looking at the car, they get the impression that obviously is not Zeb that left it. One of the main physical indications was that the seat of the driver's seat was pulled up really close to the steering wheel, way closer than Zeb would have been able to fit in. Unfortunately, though, nothing comes of this. There's no new leads or anything. 9 years later, a couple does come forward saying that they saw Zeb's car in the parking lot that it was found, and they saw a blonde girl driving it. Even though it's been 9 years, they think that they have a pretty good memory of what she looked like. So they went in to provide a description for one of the composite sketches to be done. And when it was released, a lot of people felt like it looked eerily like Misty. Misty being the gal that Zeb was talking to not long prior to his disappearance. This didn't really go anywhere, though, for a number of reasons, even though they weren't really clarified. So there are a number of reasons that we can speculate. The only statement that was given was that a female was fingerprinted, also submitted DNA, and was not a suspect, but that statement did not confirm whether it was or was not Misty. There was also the concern that the sketch artist who was taking the information to make the drawing was aware of the case and had seen photos of Misty, so may have subconsciously just referenced those memories of Misty and then kind of meshed them together with what the description of the couple was giving. Unfortunately, the case went cold again until March 15th, 2015, when a call came in from a relative of a couple named Christy and JT Codd. If you are a Food Network fan, you may recognize Christy. She was on season 8 of Food Network Star in 2012, and she was also an aspiring actress who had a small role in Mona Lisa's Smile with Julia Roberts. It sounds like she really liked the acting world, but her true passion was cooking. Her motto was inspiring people and educating them to eat really healthy. And just because there's the name healthy attached to a food, it doesn't mean that it is bland and gross and boring. And she really wanted to just kind of shake things up and show people that they could get really creative and make tasty food and it be good for them. So for her career, she kind of interwove those two worlds together and became a caterer on movie sets. I never thought about how cool that job would be until I started researching this. Not because like I'm like a cook or anything. I would be like the worst caterer ever. But that'd be really cool to like be the one who's like feeding the stars. You're just like so appreciated, I bet. Her husband was also in the movie industry, film industry. He worked as a grip on movie and television sets. They're both just described as wonderful humans. He's described as having this larger than life personality, and Christy described as somebody who just lived to make other people feel good and happy. Christy was raised in Mississippi, and so her style was really embracing Southern Cajun style recipes. I'm salivating just thinking about it. And she just loved making people feel good, like by filling their bellies, you know? Her college roommate said she would cook for everybody, not just like people in her dorms, but people that were like walking up the boardwalk, neighbors, strangers. If she saw somebody that was homeless, like that was the first person she would always want to feed. And JT actually wanted to live and see what it was like to live homeless. So he did for a year so that he could experience that and kind of take that on in his life moving forward. His friends said that he was always the biggest advocate for an underdog. He was the first person to take somebody under his wing that nobody else would even pay attention to. I read somewhere that one of his friends said that he was the type of guy who would invite people in who didn't have homes so that they could just use his shower. The impression that I got was that JT and Christy were both very happy and secure in their lives prior to even becoming a couple. They just naturally had this really amazing energy about them, and they weren't really like searching for anything or anyone to fill that void. So when they met as friends, and then they just started realizing they had a lot in common in terms of obviously like their humanity, but they also were very passionate about being outdoors and very adventurous. One of their friends explained them coming together as they probably would have been just powerhouses on their own, but when they realized they were absolutely perfect together, just like beautiful things happen. So with both of their careers, they were always traveling everywhere. And one of their biggest goals was to just have like a homestead to come home to. They finally found what they refer to as a little slice of heaven in North Carolina. They found this land with about 36 acres of property and a home that was already on it, but that needed some fixing upping. This sounded like the ideal situation for them though, because they wanted to completely make it their own. They just needed the bones and the land. And so once they found this property, they got cracking. I don't think anybody in Christy or JT's life would have suspected that if they were, not in touch, something sinister had happened. Maybe they were on an adventure or on a set. So it actually took JT and Christy not showing up to a family event that they would have been at for their loved ones to realize that they were missing, and they were immediately concerned. Especially concerned because Christy was 5 months pregnant. So the more they thought about it, they were like, well, she probably wouldn't just go rogue right now without telling anybody.
Bill Schoen, who was Christy's father, called in because she was supposed to be in Mississippi on Sunday, and they had not been able to make contact with her. So the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office went out to do a check on the welfare at the residence there at 87 Hooker's Gap Road. Deputies arrived and they were able to look and clear around the residence. Didn't see anything suspicious at the time. Shortly thereafter, we were able to locate a neighbor who had a key who came out to let us come into the residence, and we went in at that time. There were things when we entered the residence that let us know that there were probably some things that weren't quite as they should be when we went into the residence.
Police are called, they come to the home, and they're given a tour by one of Christy and JT's family members, and they notice that there are some key things missing. There's jewelry missing, there's a laptop missing, also a handgun, But one of the most concerning things for their family member was that their dog was left alone, unfed, and this is not something either of them would do. So questioning friends and family of Christy and JT, they get their first lead, and they find out that about a year prior to their disappearance, the two of them had gotten married. And at their wedding, there was a guest that stuck out to Christy and JT's guest. He was described as a down on his luck handyman that was helping Christy and JT on their, forever homestead, family, self-sustaining dream house. And so he was invited to the wedding, which didn't surprise anybody that knew Christy and JT, because of course they were just going to take this person in and love them like their own and invite them to their wedding. But he was odd. He was described as odd and also a little bit confrontational at the end of the evening. And when one of JT's friends talked to him about it, he was just like, oh, like, let it go. It's a party. There's been alcohol. We don't know what was said. Just kind of let it slide. So you may be thinking, how does this have anything to do with Zeb's case? Well, that handyman that was doing work for Christy and JT happened to be the last person that was seen with Zeb, Jason Owens.
JT didn't need a handyman. JT was helping this guy out, had knew that this guy needed money.
Owens was even invited to the couple's wedding. There he is in the background.
There isn't that connection in terms of Christy and JT's case right away, but this is the person that JT and Christy's friends are telling investigators to talk to. So they go and they talk to Jason's wife, and she tells them that Jason confided in her that there was an accident and he accidentally hit the two of them while he was driving their truck on their property. They then find out that on the 20th of March, there was a fire that mysteriously burnt down Jason's trailer. So they get a search warrant and they find bone fragments in a wood stove on Jason's property. They send them for testing. And while they're waiting for, all the answers, who, what, why, when, how, the investigators on Zeb's case get a call from a member of Jason's family saying that ever since Zeb's disappearance and now hearing about this going on, there's just been something that was weighing on them. He wasn't sure if it was anything, but before Zeb disappeared, Jason used to have like a pit area on his property that was used to burn things. After Zeb disappeared, though, this burn area was covered with concrete, and he said it was to build a fish pond. And it was really one of those things that didn't really make sense to anybody, because this wasn't an area that was right outside on the back porch or like near like a little cute fire setting where you could just enjoy this pond. It was like quite a ways back on the property. You'd have to like take quite the stroll there to just go and see the pond of fish. It just didn't make a lot of sense. And then later the family members were like, oh, okay, well, he must have not really thought it out well and is now seeing that this doesn't make sense because the pond was never completed. And he ultimately just filled the area with dirt. So with this information, a warrant is issued to search the property.
All along, Owens has been a person of interest in the disappearance of 18-year-old Zeb Quinn. The sheriff said during that search that the murders made them take a second look.
It's very complex, as you've reported on. Mr. Owens was a person of interest in the Quinn disappearance from 2000, and those kind of things do make the case. It does make the case much more complicated.
Those search warrants released Monday tell us what investigators involved in Quinn's case found. Fabric, leather materials, unknown hard fragments, unknown white powder substance, metal, and concrete are the listed items seized from Owens' property on that day.
They also found a bunch of plastic bags that were on the property with which they described as having possible pulverized lime in it. And I think we all know what lime can be used for. When it came to JT and Christy's case, it did not take long for Jason to confess to accidentally killing Christy, JT, and their unborn daughter, Skylar. He said that he and the couple were trying to move a car that was stuck in the ditch near their property or on their property. And meaning to reverse, he actually accelerated and moved forward and ran them over, and then panicked and reversed and backed over them again. He panicked when he saw that they were no longer alive, and in his mind, he just kept thinking about the fact that he had been questioned about Zeb and his disappearance. So he brought them back to their house, where he dismembered them and placed their bodies in plastic bags. From there, he brought them to a wood stove that he had on his property and burned them. He also said he moved their cars deliberately and stole their jewelry in their house to make it look like a robbery gone bad. He ultimately was charged with first-degree murder in the murder of JT, Christy, and Skylar, and sentenced to 60 to 75 years in prison.
A short, solemn apology.
That I am sincerely sorry, causing the loss of your loved ones and the pain and suffering that it's caused you.
And a sentence handed down.
238 months minimum, 298 months maximum.
Was all that it took to close the case of the deaths of JT and Christy Codd and their unborn child, Skylar.
We're able to bring Jason Owens to justice. He's removed from society. He's going to die in the custody of the state of North Carolina.
After he was sentenced in Christy and JT and Skylar's case, there really wasn't much going on with Zeb's, but there was the suspicion that he was involved. It wasn't until 2 years after he was sentenced, though, that he was ultimately indicted for first-degree murder of the murder of Zeb Quinn. But it wasn't until July of last year, so July 2022, that Jason actually came forward with saying that he had knowledge about Zeb's murder, and he pleaded guilty to accessory after the fact. Now, Jason's version of events as to what happened to Zeb are as follows. Jason said that on the evening of, or the evening prior to Zeb's disappearance, Jason's uncle Gene called Jason and asked if he knew Zeb from Walmart. He said, yeah, kind of like in passing, like kind of acquaintances. And Gene said, well, there's this girl named Misty who has a jealous boyfriend who's been talking to Zeb. She wanted to know if you could get him to a campsite that she was hanging out at. Holy Sherilyn. Because she didn't want to call and get caught going behind Wesley's back. He said yes. He went to meet Zeb at Walmart, said that Misty wanted to meet him up at this campsite and that he would go with him. He says as they're driving, they see his uncle's truck pulled over. So they stopped thinking, okay, like maybe this is the area or it's close by. And Jason's uncle says that Misty is going to be arriving soon. So as Zeb is just like walking around as they're having like small talk, Jason says his uncle pulls out a rifle and just shoots Zeb in the back. He says he's freaking out. He asks his uncle what he's doing, and his uncle just tells him he was poking his nose around where he shouldn't be. Jason said he was scared because his uncle told him to go home and not even think about telling anybody, not calling the police, because since he was there and brought Zeb there and saw this happen, he is now an accessory to murder. He also made sure to tell him that the gun that he used is one that he stole from Jason's house so that it had Jason's fingerprints on it. He says he went home, but the next day, while he was driving to work in the morning, he was curious and he wanted to see if Zeb was still in that area or if his car was. And so he drove up there and he comes across his uncle again, who's there and has a fire going. He says he sees legs, and then his uncle looks at him and says, oh, did you come to join me to burn marshmallows? He said since he showed up to check on things, he had to stay and see them through and help him get rid of the ashes. Jason said they threw the ashes in the woods and disposed of Zeb's skull in a creek. Next, he said his uncle told him to leave and go to urgent care right away to report a car accident so that he would have something to bring to his work for not showing up and being late that morning. Kind of like not like a sick note, but like, hey, I was just in an accident. Here's my proof. And then he tells him to also call in to Zeb's job so that no one gets too suspicious too soon. So he did. Jason said the reason why he never said anything to police when he was first questioned was because Jean threatened him. But he also provided like a lot of information that, you know, Jason was privy to. Jason said that Jean also told him that he was the one who parked Zeb's car in this parking lot and pushed the seat forward to make it look like it was a female. He went to Kmart to buy a female jacket, and before planting it in the car, he actually took it to a laundromat to wash it to make it seem like, you know, it didn't have that like new store smell and that it had been washed a couple times, so it was someone's. And then he popped some weed in the pocket to make it look like it, you know, legitimately was someone's. He also said that he took hairs off a girl's jacket that was in line ahead of him while he was buying this jacket at Kmart and planted them in the car so that you could really like seal the deal that this was a woman driving. The part of the confession where the dog came into play was like very skimmed over. I believe it was one that his uncle said he came across or got to specifically throw people off. A little fun fact that, you know, did warm my heart about the dog is that one of the investigators on the case was the one to adopt the dog. So that's what Jason said. And conveniently for him, Jean is now dead. So he was never been able to be confronted or questioned about this. My understanding is the area that Jason said he and his uncle disposed of ashes was searched, but nothing came of it. I mean, I suppose wilder things have happened, but I feel like we all kind of know like who the more likely killer is in this between like Jean and Jason. But the question is like, why? What's the motive? Based on Jason's statements in both cases and just like his lack of accountability, I don't feel like those questions will ever be answered. And that really sucks for Zeb and Christy and JT's family.
You know, we were close. And of course, I thought he was a special kid. But to hear it from others is really important. It means a lot.
She's 5 months pregnant, and he was so happy about that and how someone could kill a pregnant woman. And this guy knew that she was pregnant, how happy they were.
Friends are still in shock. They remember JT as a loving, bigger-than-life guy who would go out of his way to help others. Christy, the same.
I can only take solace in, or a little solace in, is that I know that the three of them are together. And they're at peace, and they don't have to go through this.
There's really just nothing that bothers me more than when somebody has been caught with like pretty decent, convincing evidence and you've already pled guilty, like you're already kind of doing it. Like just be honest. You've done enough to these families. Like giving them answers as to what happened or where they can find their loved ones is literally the bare minimum that you can do for ripping them away from their life. You know? Now, the only thing that I've gone back to that I could not find an answer to was why the page from Aunt Ina the day that he disappeared. I don't know. And it was never explained. So maybe it was just like a convenient time. You know, maybe it was Wesley and he might have had plans to just like lure Zeb somewhere to maybe like jump him or something like that. I don't know. The only thing that I couldn't find answers to. If you have any or suggestions, please leave them because it's the only thing that is left in my mind. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure like we're clear who's responsible here. Okay, that is it for me today. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It means the world to me. I love and I appreciate you so much. The answer to today's riddle is, quick refresher, what is the difference between a jeweler and a jailer? And the answer is a jeweler sells watches where a jailer watches sells. Boom! How cute is that? All right, I gotta go. I will see you in the next video. I miss you terribly until then. Make sure to love each other, love yourself, and I will see you soon. Bye.